This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome everybody to the 2020 Novak webinar series. The webinars are something we've done for a little over a year now. We think they've been really successful, and the reason they have been successful is because we've had a lot of great presenters. Some of the Novak staff has done some of these, and I think they're outstanding, and hope you do as well. And we're actually having a repeat guest this time, and this is Chris Reel from TPS Technical. We've sort of been in the same industry, or at least I've been in the industry with him for maybe almost 20 years. Always knew of him, always known that he's been recognized as the absolute leader in vehicle sound and spark arresters and mufflers and many other topics which he'll get into. But I'm excited to have him on tonight because we're going to talk about a very serious issue that sometimes is easy to overlook, and that's about spark arresters. And he has some information that's going to be remedial in the sense that he's going to describe what spark arresters are. But he also may have some new information about changes to the way spark arresters are in the current environment and what may be coming down the pike soon. So I'm really excited about that. Also really excited about the opportunity to have each of you ask any questions you may want to have. But the way Novak does our webinars is we ask everyone to stay on mute the entire time. If you have a question, the way to ask it at any point is there's a little dialog box. It's typically on the top right of your screen. If you click on that, that'll open a chat feature. There's a slot at the bottom that says enter your message. And if you type in a question there and hit enter, it will go to everyone. And throughout the entire presentation, Novak staff will be monitoring the questions comes in, and we'll make sure that they get answered. But again, we're really excited to have Chris Reel. He's a leader in what he does. He's been a friend of the OHV community, OHV Recreation, and Novak itself for a long time. And I really appreciate him being here and hope you guys get as much out of this presentation as I always do when I get the opportunity to hear from Chris. So Chris, without further ado, if you want to take over. Thank you.
Okay. Well, number one, welcome everybody, and thanks to Novak for hosting this. You know, it's really my pleasure to be able to address the group either on these webinars or at the functions that we all attend, whether it be the outdoor ride days or other conferences. But with travel being what it is, I think we'll answer some questions and get through a presentation tonight on spark arresters. And spark arresters are one of my favorite topics because they're really low cost and really high value. So with that, we'll kind of go through a few slides and I'll do a little demonstration at the conclusion. Little bit about my company, DPS Technical. You know, we're about 30 years old. Our specialty is testing vehicles and taking measurements. And so many people will know who we are because of the activities related to noise evaluations in the field, whether we're looking at mufflers at a technical inspection or roadside for automobiles or motorcycles, or even environmental sound studies for facilities. You know, facilities could be a racetrack, it could be an airport, or it could be logging operations over the spotted owl habitat. So for us, it's a measurement by a defined procedure, and hopefully that is fair to everybody. Personally, I've worked in the motorized recreation community my entire working career, and I'm somewhat addicted to it. So I participate as a test rider, consultant to teams, and I work extensively with land managers and the OEM community. And with the Forest Service and spark arresters, this is really an important subject. So, you know, backing up just a little bit on why are we talking about spark arresters? Spark arresters are a very relevant part of preventing vehicular related wildfires, and they've been around for a long time. So my 4 questions, what is a spark arrestor anyway? First of all, it's a device that strains or screens out the glowing ember, so it no longer poses an ignition risk once it gets out. And so we'll see spark arresters on everything from locomotives, that's where they started, to small engines like chainsaws and generators, and of course on transportation equipment, motorcycles, ATVs, ROVs, and even boats. Questions come up very often, why don't cars have spark arrestor requirements? Technically they do. However, the exhaust system on an automobile is very long, and that allows the glowing ember to cool in the exhaust system, which is usually a fairly long tube and a mechanical muffler where the ember can cool and come out. Another question that I get often is a spark arrestor a muffler? Answer to that is no. A spark arrestor is intended exclusively to minimize the discharge of an ignition source. A muffler, his intended purpose is to mitigate and minimize sound. So yes, they're both in the exhaust system, but they have different functions. And then the next question that is often asked is, how do we know if a vehicle has a spark arrestor? And we need to do an inspection and understand what the various designs are. So with that, I'll go on into the next slide. When we talk about glowing embers, it's been well documented that a glowing ember of about 23 thousandths of an inch, if it's smaller than that, it doesn't pose much of an ignition risk. Spark arrestors are qualified based on the design of the component. Most of the spark arrestors that we're familiar with are either a turbine style or a screen style spark arrestor. Although there are some new technologies which I'll talk about a little bit later. But what the spark arrestors do is they remove or cool the glowing ember. And next slide, please. Okay, so who develops spark arrestors? Who tests them? Why are they tested? And what is the process? Well, we'll start at the real beginning. Why do we have them? Ultimately is to protect the environment. Spark arrestor technology isn't new. It dates back to the 1800s when locomotives were going through the forest hauling logs and across the grasslands, and wood and coal was being discharged and fires were prevalent. So the Department of Agriculture said, well, we're smart guys. We need to do something about this. So they developed a method for containing the glowing embers and letting them cool, and that's where spark arrestors started. The Forest Service San Dimas Technology and Development Center, which they have a facility out here in California and also one in Missoula. I call it Smokey the Bear's Area 51. Those guys and ladies test and develop cool things. They may be working on spark arrestors. They may be working on firefighting pieces of equipment. They may be taking measurements on vehicles for pitch stability and chainsaw safety. But it's basically an engineering house, and when we qualify a spark arrestor, we will take it over to the technology center fill out some forms, an engineering diagram, and formally submit it, and it'll get a comprehensive engineering review by the Forest Service, and it'll be approved and posted in the U.S. Forest Service publication, the Spark Arrestor Guide, which is basically the Bible of everything that has ever been qualified for spark arresters. Next slide, please. So, with technology, we do have evolving vehicles, and off-highway vehicles of the past are very, very different from off-highway vehicles of the present, and we're going to see some new developments in the future. So, with the UTVs, they're very capable vehicles. They have a lot of horsepower. They can go just about any place from a performance standpoint, and they have gasoline or diesel engines, and so these are a potential ignition source in the environment. Motorcycles and ATVs have been around for a long time, but this fleet is also evolving. The motorcycles of the past, there were a lot of two-cycle engines. Many of those have evolved to four-cycle engines. The two-cycle engines of today are using advanced technology such as fuel injection and more electronic controls. And motorcycles, have evolved from just off-highway vehicles to dual sport, where they're capable and legal to be run both on paved surfaces on the highway and roads, and they're very capable off-road. And so they're evolving, and of course with evolution, one vehicle doesn't fit everybody, so you have some lightweight small displacement dual sport bikes, and then we have the full large displacement adventure bikes, which are basically a vehicle that it's capable of off paved surfaces travel, and these are emission controlled vehicles, and they're fairly off-road capable. And personally, I ride off-road motorcycles as well as the dual sport and the large adventure touring bikes. And so it isn't uncommon to see a large 500-pound motorcycle traversing a mountain road. And so we've needed to take into consideration some things related to these. Next slide, please. So when we talk about spark arresters, really I want to talk mostly about the exhaust system and where they're located and how the exhaust systems are changing. On the slide that's on your screen, top left is an automobile exhaust system. You'll notice that it's several feet in length, and we're getting ready to do a test on that. And you'll see that the outgoing gas has a long distance to travel, so it has the opportunity to cool, and the glowing ember has the opportunity to dissipate and become trapped and cool in the mechanical muffler. The photo on the top right is a recreational off-highway motorcycle mechanical muffler, and it has a spark arrestor in it. And the spark arrestor on this design is a screen style. So the 23,000 mesh screen does the job of keeping the glowing ember from escaping. Photo on the bottom right is a racing exhaust. You'll notice that the muffler is rather abbreviated. It's not very big, and it's a bypass or a glass pack style muffler, and it has a short head pipe. And so what that does is it allows the heated gas to come from the engine, and it doesn't spend much time in the system to cool. And with this system, there isn't a spark arrestor, so that would definitely be an exhaust system that isn't intended for off-highway recreational use without some countermeasure. And the photo on the left is actually an exhaust system on one of the new adventure bikes. This has dual catalytic converters and a mechanical muffler, pre-muffler, and a secondary resonance muffler at the end. And what's interesting about the adventure bikes, they have the need to comply with emission regulations, and some of the vehicle manufacturers, such as KTM and Husqvarna and a couple of the others, have formally qualified the catalytic converter and the mechanical exhaust as a U.S. Forest Service qualified spark arrestor. Next slide, please. So, when we talk about spark arresters and mufflers, spark arresters, have a function, and the function is really exclusively pointed at minimizing the potential for discharge. Next slide. Okay. Some of the new technologies that we are seeing, the vehicles are becoming much more high performance. They're lighter, and the manufacturers are paying close attention to both cost and functionality. And so the screen style spark arresters are relatively inexpensive to manufacture, and they're pretty easy to retrofit into existing exhaust systems. The thing with a qualified spark arrestor is that it needs to be serviced, and inspected. The challenge that exists is for emissions and anti-tampering regulations. It's illegal to have the emission system to be able to be removed or defaced or tampered with. So we have some conflicting regulations. EPA says you can't tamper with it, and Forest Service says you must. And so it's been a challenge as the technologies have come forward. So to address these bumpy spots in the road, the Spark Arrestor Committee from SAE, which is made up of qualified individuals, Forest Service participates heavily, and industry participates heavily in that. We've taken a solid look at the design and the functionality, and saying, well, if it's built in and it's welded in, and it has a guaranteed demonstrated duty cycle of 5 years or longer, and if it fails in its functionality, it's a mandatory recall. It kind of makes sense to allow that to be a non-serviceable unit, providing it functions. And so that's where we are with the new spark arrestor catalytic converter technology. And the photo on the bottom right is one of the new honeycomb style catalytic converters, and it has anywhere from 200 to 400 cells per square inch, and they're very close together, so the glowing ember can't escape through this catalytic system. And this converter here, it's about 3 inches, 2.5 inches in diameter, and it's about 3 inches long, and so it has a lot of surface area to degrade the glowing ember, and they're very efficient when it comes to degrading the glowing ember, and also allowing for good performance and good flow on top of being an emission control item. Next slide, please. Then now spark arresters, have they have different designs, and so what we'll see, as off-road folks, we'll typically see screen style because they're they're easiest to manufacture. They're the easiest to get qualified through the engineering review, and they're pretty easy to contend with. Historically, we've had some disc style spark arresters, which work the same way. The spacing between the discs traps the glowing ember and keeps it from escaping. And then we've also had turbine style or Krinsman style spark arresters, which push the glowing ember into a cooling ring to allow it to tumble and to cool before it gets out. So these are some photos here of spark arresters. Top left is is kind of a group shot of some things you might see. Bottom left is a disc style. A company called Supertrap has made them for years. They're fairly common on some of the larger vehicles. Their popularity comes and goes over time. The turbine style, very often the turbine styles are built inside of a mechanical muffler, and they're a little bit challenging to inspect because they're built in, but all qualified exhaust systems need to be marked. So the photo on the bottom right is in that photo we have a screen style spark arrestor. It's attached to a quiet core for an absorption style muffler. In that photo is a sound diffuser disc. It's a small device that is often put in in an exhaust system, and that's for sound. It's not a spark arrestor because the porosity of that is pretty loose. And then the device on the right, on that photo and on the bottom right, that's a kitchen sink strainer. It's not a spark arrestor. But we'll see people say, "Oh, I need to put a screen in," and we'll put one of those in, and that is not a qualified spark arrestor, and it's pretty ineffective. Next slide, please. Okay, so when we're doing an inspection, most of the time we'll do a visual inspection and a probe check. The most common, easiest way to do an inspection is with an irrigation flag. It's an irrigation flag is it's a 1/16 of an inch. It's 62 thousandths. If it goes straight through the muffler unobstructed, absolutely that there isn't a spark arrestor in there, or it's damaged, or it's non-functioning. We can't very easily do a 23 thousandths wire inspection. The wire is so flimsy you can't direct it into the screen. So we'll fish around with our irrigation probe, see if there's something there. If when in doubt, making sure that the engine is off, we'll take a flashlight and take a look, and we'll also look for the identification label that's required to be on the exhaust. Unfortunately, in the off-road world, there's mud and things get covered up and defaced. So doing a probe inspection is probably the easiest thing to do. Many writing areas have regulations about spark arrestor requirements. It's typically goes hand in hand with a noise ordinance, but the spark arresters are actually a required item. It's been published in the Code of Federal federal regulations since the mid 1970s, and that is, it's an order that if you're going to be running off highway, um, vehicles need to, by federal statute, need to have a spark arrestor that's qualified, and the states also have an opinion on that as well. So they may have supplemental regulations, and ultimately it's the forest supervisor or the regional land manager that can assess the risks and make a determination on what is best suited for their region and the conditions, of the day. And do vehicles contribute to fire? Yes, they can. And so this has been a topic of discussion. People say, well, I don't see any sparks. How can that be a problem? Vehicles do cause fires and contribute to them, and a spark arrestor, if you've got a spark arrestor, the likelihood of a fire is much reduced from the glowing ember. Okay, next slide. Okay, here are a couple of my photos that I like. The probing and then doing an inspection. We have a motorcycle and also a UTV. Many of the UTVs, the guys will change to a performance exhaust, and many of those have a removable spark arrestor, and it gets removed or damaged. And of course, things do wear, and that's why we inspect the screens. And so the photos here on the right, one is a well-maintained spark arrestor, and the other is not. And this photo was, this guy actually came through tech inspection, and he said, "Yeah, I got a spark arrestor in there." And as soon as we saw it, we found otherwise. Next slide. So the new technology, we're going to see more emission compliant vehicles being utilized off highway. The UTVs and side by sides, those are all emission compliant. They have pretty robust exhaust systems. They have a long duty cycle, and they're pretty durable, but they do need maintenance. We're going to see the many of these vehicles coming with emission controls, catalytic converters, or different designed exhaust systems that are going to make it a little bit more challenging to do a field inspection, and also to there's always a little bit of educational delay with land managers and what has a spark arrestor on it. And so industry is working towards some resources to help identify the vehicles and the designs to make it a lot easier at the trailhead and at the park. So bottom left is a catalytic converter, honeycomb style with the appropriate openings, and these are very commonly found inside the exhaust system. The diagram on the right has a catalytic converter towards the front of the exhaust, and this exhaust system also has a supplemental screen style spark arrestor right at the outlet end of the exhaust. Some of the manufacturers, particularly the manufacturers, are a little bit unsure of the designs and outgoing gas temperatures. Some of the manufacturers are incorporating both methods of emission control and ignition suppression with with actually two functioning spark arrestors in the exhaust system. So it's pretty exciting time. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's a video, if it plays, which we never know, that should show how we do a quick field inspection.
Hi, I'm Chris Reel, DPS Technical. Today we're going to give you a little refresher on spark arresters for off-highway motorcycles. Most motorcycles that are used off-road are required to have a qualified spark arrestor. The spark arrestor's function is to capture the glowing embers so that they do not pose a fire hazard to the environment. Many of the spark arresters in mufflers are located towards the back, and the predominant design right now is a screen style spark arrestor that strains the outgoing gases and captures the glowing embers and allows them to cool. One of the ways that we inspect for a spark arrestor is with a probe. We insert it into the exhaust system, and if we detect a spark arrestor, that's how we do a test. It's got to have a prescribed opening. It's published in the Spark Arrestor Guide, but usually an irrigation probe is sufficient to capture or to detect the screen. This exhaust has a spark arrestor and a quiet tipped exhaust. Remember, always use a spark arrestor if you're going to ride off-road. I'm Chris Reel with DPS Technical. Thank you.
Okay, so you know, we've had a chance to understand kind of what a spark arrestor is and how they function, and you know, I can assure you that the technology is very, very efficient, and it does an excellent job in containing and controlling the glowing embers. And you know, from a regulatory standpoint, it's one of the things that if we're doing spark arrestor inspections and mandating and requiring spark arresters, very often we get less community concerns related to OHV activity in the area. So you know, we have some pretty exciting things coming here. You know, we'll be making an announcement on July 1st, some things that'll make doing a spark arrestor or a sound check or an environmental sound measurement much easier for the people in the field, and also the folks who need to process permits and making sure that the recreation opportunity is well managed and well understood. So you know, I'm really proud to be a member of this community, and really appreciate having the opportunity to present to everybody tonight. And I do look forward to questions, and once our travel opens up a little bit, I will get back to you know, some field meets and some conferences, and seeing our you know, seeing people face to face and enjoying the great outdoors. But thank you very much for letting me present this evening.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. I'm always kind of astounded by the breadth of knowledge that you have on these topics, and we really, really appreciate you sharing your time with us and your expertise. And I kind of have a question myself that I'd like to kick off with. But before I do that, if anyone participating has any questions, please go ahead and type it into the chat function right now, and we'll make sure we get it asked. But what, if any, performance gain would someone get from removing a spark arrestor on any of these vehicles?
Well, that's a valid question, and I can speak as a team manager. I can speak as a development writer and as an enthusiast. What the spark arrestor does, if it's properly designed, its open area is 2.5 times the size of the smallest restriction. So it really has very, very little effect, if any, on horsepower. But what it does is it does provide some uniform back pressure, which takes on some of the vehicles, it takes a little tiny bit of the instant snap out of the power delivery. And so for the supercross guys and the arena cross guys, they need that extra snap. But they're also in an area that's, it's unlikely to be a fire hazard. So, but when we're running off-road enduro or endurocross, and as a team manager on that side, running in concrete arenas on our bike, we always ran spark arresters because I needed to tame the power for better tractability. So spark arresters, yes, they will take maybe a half a horsepower away out of a 60 horsepower vehicle, right way up on top, but they actually help in some instances as traction control. So from a pure power perspective, they have very, very little effect upon horsepower and torque. They may have a little effect on power delivery on some vehicles, but usually it's non-detectable.
Thank you. I can tell you with absolute assurity that at my riding level, it wouldn't make any difference. It's interesting to hear that at least in some applications, and perhaps the majority of the applications, it could be a net benefit to have it as opposed to a detriment, which is cool. We do have a couple questions from the participants, but I did want to ask one other question before we get into those, or maybe a two-part question, and that is, how important is it for us if we buy a used vehicle to check for the spark arrestor, and what do we do if it's not there?
Well, number one, you want to check, make sure that you can legally ride it on, off of a racetrack, on any federally managed land. It's, it is a regulation. So number one, you're going to want to check. A visual check, with a flashlight, you can typically see them in the exhaust. If the exhaust has been modified, well, then you're going to need to do some reconstruction or addition. The replacement or aftermarket mufflers, usually the spark arrestor is a it's a one bolt or one snap ring installation, and it's a really low cost item. It's typically they're a $15 or $20 screen that goes in pretty easy. So buying a used vehicle, you may need to make sure that it's suitably equipped. Now, some vehicles never came with a spark arrestor. The closed course vehicles, racetrack use only vehicles, they don't come with a spark arrestor by federal regulation, and so that's where we'll see a replacement exhaust put on them, and those are maybe a little bit quieter. They may be a little bit lighter, and they may have different outlet tips. That some of the tips may have a spark arrestor or a quiet insert to conform to sporting regulations. And the sporting regulations on sound are pretty pretty well enforced throughout North America. The United States, we have several different sanctioning bodies and levels of enforcement, and my friends up in Canada, the CMRC, have similar regulations, and at the international level, we also see mufflers being scrutinized and spark arresters being required.
Thank you. Now we'll get into some questions from webinar participants. Robert asks, are OHV exhaust systems still stamped as Forest Service approved?
Most of the emission compliant ones are. So the answer to that is yes. Some of the closed course competition vehicles are stamped that it does not conform to noise, and they do not have spark arresters. So if it's an emission controlled EPA off-highway recreational vehicle, when they come from the manufacturers, they will be stamped.
Great. Chelsea wants a little clarification and asks, what is the tool used to check the spark arrestor? Check for it.
Okay. Well, what we use for field inspections is an irrigation flag. You get them at Lowe's or Home Depot. It's a 1/16 of an inch diameter wire. It's like a welding rod with a little flag on it. That's a field, checker. It's not a true inspection tool where you're qualifying and quantifying the open area. So for field inspections, a wire probe is good. If you're a land manager and you're doing a fire inspection, then we're going to need to do a disassembly and a comprehensive evaluation and actually measure the porosity of the screen, and that is typically around 23 thousandths of an inch, and all of the specifications on qualified exhaust systems, spark arresters, are published in the Forest Service's spark arrestor guide.
Thanks. And when you say irrigation flag, are these the same flags that I see, maybe marking off where the cable line's going to be run, the little wire with the flag on it, or sometimes you see people use them to mark boundaries of their property? Are they the same?
Yes, yeah. And they're those small diameter ones. They're smaller than a coat hanger. They're, a 1/16 of an inch in diameter. So those are what we make sure that tech inspectors and land managers have access to. You need to be a little bit careful, of course. That you don't want to poke holes in a spark arrestor on a vehicle. So you need to be a little bit gentle with it. But that's what we're using. And typically the ones that are 16 inches in length are ideal, because usually the spark arrestor is at the back end of the muffler. So you're only probing in maybe anywhere from 2 to 6 inches.
Awesome, thank you. Steve has a question, and he says, during my race events where spark arresters are always required, he says he has a turbine core, and others do as well, and they have nearly failed inspection due to the small gauge flag passing through. Have you run into this issue? And are folks being trained to work with that?
Yes, there is recognized training. We actually bring a turbine core exhaust system to all of our trainings. And what happens when the irrigation flag goes, it will hit one of the vanes and it will deflect. It will still go through, but it will deflect. And the turbine core, and that's the turbine cores are very, very common on the two-stroke motorcycles, because the oil tends to foul some of the screens pretty easily. So the turbine core will be the exhaust system will be marked, and it's important to have the tech inspectors understand what that is and kind of what its function is, and we go to great lengths to make sure that's understood technology. And July 1st there will be some help on that.
Great, love the teaser, and you help share that information as it becomes available with Novak. We'll make sure everyone gets it in our community as well.
Sure. Sure.
And since you mentioned two strokes, that's a nice segue into Brett's question. And he says the screen type is a problem on two strokes, and they've had several plug up on riders on the trail, and they require more maintenance to keep them clean. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a true statement. I'm a two-stroke rider, been a two-stroke rider for a long time. I've got a 1972 Bull Taco. So yes, it's a problem. with the screens. They do record, the two strokes, the older technology two strokes where you're pre-mixing fuel and have a carburetor. The screen, on a two stroke just doesn't get hot enough to keep itself clean, and so that becomes a maintenance item, where it needs to be pulled apart and cleaned, and the stainless screen is very easily cleaned with a solvent, or in my case I like using Lime-A-Way, and I just pull the screen out and I put it in a pan. I give it a couple shots of Lime-A-Way, wash it with some hot soapy water, and it's clean as a whistle. But the two strokes and spark arresters, the screens do have some challenges, and that's where the turbine core style exhaust tends to be a common technology for those.
Great, thank you. And you may have answered this to some degree, but to make sure you cover it comprehensively, Robert asks, what are some of your best techniques to clean a spark arrestor versus replacement?
Being a lubrication engineer, oil and carbon really doesn't like either strong alkalins or strong acids. So some of the, when I pull the screens out, an acid type cleaner, and I don't want to get this on any anodized aluminum, and I want to stress that because it will take your pretty anodized aluminum and it will make it less than pretty. So I pull the spark arrestor out, I put it in a pan, and if I'm in a hurry, I use the Lime-A-Way, and that does a really good job. If I've got a little bit of extra time, an engine degreaser such as gunk works really good. If it's very crusted on, where the spark arrestor has gotten pretty hot and the carbon has accumulated, sometimes I'll need to utilize both a chemical degradation or a small propane torch. If you're careful with it, it'll burn that carbon off really easily. And I like inspecting the spark arrestor screens when I have them apart. It's pretty easy to have them degrade, and so keeping them clean with some routine maintenance it's pretty straightforward.
Awesome, thank you. And we talked a little bit at the beginning about how OHV safety is not just focused on wearing the right gear or doing the right thing on trails, but it's also about being safe and responsible. And it's Trailer Safety Week, and Novak is promoting safety trailers. So I want to ask you this question because I think you're the right guy, and it's related tangentially at a minimum to spark arresters, and that's okay. I think we're all sold. We need to have the spark arrestor. The importance of them, it can't be denied, and we need to avoid forest fires. Are there any precautions the average off-highway vehicle enthusiast needs to take when they have hot exhaust? Going back to the trailer, sitting, pulling over to the side in the grass at a campsite or somewhere to eat lunch. Are there any precautions we need to take, or is that simply not a fear we need to be concerned about, igniting something with just the hot exhaust itself?
Well, the hot exhaust is particularly on some of the vehicles. The four strokes, the exhaust can get glowing cherry red. It is, when you first, when you're riding and you first stop, it's not uncommon for that head pipe, which is right down there by your calf, to be, 350 to 400 degrees. That's, in my class, when we teach that, I make everybody raise their right hand and repeat after me. That son of gun's hot. It's not hot enough to burn you. It's hot enough to make flesh stick. Okay? So when we get back to our trailer, we kind of don't want to let that be in close proximity to something that can burn or melt or or any little kids around. And so the good side is it cools off very quickly, and within 2 minutes or so, the heat dissipation on a exhaust header is it's really got to a tolerable temperature. But I don't like having a screaming hot motorcycle just stuck straight in my trailer. I don't like that. So keep the kids away from it, let it cool for 5 minutes, and you're golden.
Great, thank you. Randy made a comment. He didn't ask this question, but he certainly intrigued me. Is it possible that the spark arrestor will have any impact on the sound from the vehicle? Can it lower the dB level?
Well, that's a good question. It can have a little effect. The screen has a very minimal effect upon the pressure pulse that exits. Okay, so we take thousands of sound measurements a year, and a spark arrestor is typically good for about a 0.5 to 1 dB best case scenario on doing the stationary test. That being said, there are many spark arrestors that also have that they're attached to a quiet core, which is a tube that has a design to break up the sound. It may be a little bend, or some of the manufacturers and such as FMF will have a perforated sound diffuser disc incorporated inside of the screen. So the spark arrestor, even though the screen is not really doing your sound reduction, the design of the fixture and some of its other components have the ability to help mitigate and minimize sound. But the spark arrestor screen, as it is, or even the turbine, has pretty minimal effect on sound, just because of how sound works and how the energy gets through the screen.
Great, thanks. And so we have a couple things I want to cover here quickly. I know we're running close to an hour, and that's when we like to shut down, but I want to highlight a comment that Don Amador made, and that's that he keeps a piece of a spark arrestor screen in his kit so that he can show it off, and if somebody has tried to make a homemade version, he can compare the size of the holes to what they put in, and they're probably not going to measure up. What are your thoughts on that?
That's an excellent tool, and the 24,000 mesh stainless screen is available at a good hardware store, and it makes a lot of sense, to show somebody what you're talking about. And that's one of the things that I always try to have in my kit. I have some real spark arrestor screen, some real screen, a few we call them witch hats, the little conical screens, and also typically have a kitchen sink strainer. So I said this is not a spark arrestor. And so the 24,000, 23,000 mesh screen is really a good thing to have in your kit.
Great, thank you. Last question before we wrap up, and the question is SuperTrap accepted as functional?
Yes, SuperTrap, the disc style spark arrestors, they've been qualified for years and years. They function. They are a spark arrestor. They do need some maintenance because they'll get plugged up with carbon also. They need to be they need to have the proper clearance between the discs, and once again that's 24,000, 23,000. So anybody that's put washers between the discs or increase the size of the dimple that spaces the discs apart, then they've disabled the functionality of the design. So, to answer the question, yes, the Super Trap discs are acceptable, but they do need to be non-tampered with and utilized, properly.
Great. Thank you, Chris. I said it before. I have no problem saying it again. I'm always entertained when you're covering these issues. Your depth of knowledge is, I think, probably unmatched, maybe anywhere in the world. And we're just, really blessed to be able to have you come on and talk about these things, because I always learn a lot. I get to go through these quite a few times, and I always seem to learn even more. So just really appreciate you doing this for us. Also going to give Dan a warning here. We'll ask him to say a couple words. But before I do that, thanks to all the participants as well. You're making these webinars a success. We hope we're providing the information you want. If you have ideas about what you would like us to cover, please feel free to email us. You can get the staff of NOVAC at trailhead@nohbcc.org, and we'll take a look. We may not be able to get to every suggestion, but where we have the right person, we will definitely try to do it. And if we get people of Chris's caliber to present, I think we'll always do well, because the knowledge is just incredible. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dan, if he'd like to say a few words. Again, Dan is Dan Kleen. He's our NOVAC's chairman and president, and all-around good guy and great OHV enthusiast. So Dan, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. Yeah, just first of all, I want to thank Chris for his time and great presentation, and offering to do that again. Looking forward to Don Amador's webinar coming up, and want to thank everybody for joining us. I think this is a great way to educate and update. So appreciate everybody taking the time to join us.
Yep, and finally,
Thanks,
thank you. And finally, I would echo Dan's comments. Thanks everybody for being involved. We are planning the next webinar. There will be an announcement soon. It will be one of our guests that's on the webinar tonight, Don Amador, the partner from NOVAC partner from California. They've done a great thing out there and started the Post-Wildfire OHV Alliance, which is an organization designed to respond to everything that occurs after a fire has gone away, and make sure we get our recreational opportunities back, as well as take care of the health of the forest or other land that they're on. So that notice will be coming out. You'll see it in your emails. It'll be posted on our website soon, next few days. And we invite everyone to participate. And if this is something you could replicate in your area for wildfires or other types of disasters, natural or otherwise, Don is the man to show us how to do that. One last time, thank you, Chris, so much. Your time is valuable, and you spend it with us, and we're very appreciative. So we'll wrap up now, but I'll give it to Chris if you have any final words.
I do, and really this kind of goes out to our community at large. We all have responsibilities, professionally and to our families and to our communities, and participating in responsible motorized recreation, and really being the spokesperson and the example and the mentor is it's hugely beneficial to everybody. And so I want to take a moment just to acknowledge and thank NOVAC for having this platform, and the other people that give so much of their time and their lives to our sport of motorized recreation, and being good citizens to the community. We do lead by example, and we're also very, very visible. So, I commend everybody for taking the time this evening, and thanks for letting me share, some of what we've done this evening.
Great, agree with all of that, Chris. We have a tremendous community that's always involved, always active, and I've been fortunate to work with a lot of the folks on this that have participated tonight and in the OHV community, and they're just the best people in the world. So I'm thrilled with that. With that, thank you again, everyone. Sign up for our next webinar with Don. We'll be planning some more. We're trying to do these more often, given everything that's going on in society right now. And while people were at home, we wanted to make sure to really bump up our efforts to keep these communications up. But we're having fun doing them. We think we're getting great content out, and with people like Chris, we're not having a problem on that end. So thank you, everyone, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.